Good day, mathematics enthusiasts. Today, our discussion will focus on the concept of squares and square roots. Let us first define what is all about square number. When we deal with square number, the other concept that is related about square number or square numbers is a perfect square. And when we talk about square number, it is a number now that is the square of a whole number. Examples of square numbers are the following. So we now have 1 times 1. 1 here is an example of a square number. We also have 2 times 2 that will give us a product of 4. 4 here is an example also of a square number. 3 times 3 that will give us a product of 9. And 9 is still an example of square number or square numbers. We also have 16 because the factors of 16 or one of the factors of 16 is we have 4 times 4. Or the square of 4 will lead us to the product which is equal to 16. Therefore, 16 is an example of square numbers. So we have 1, 4, 9, 16 are examples now of square numbers. Another example of square numbers are the following. So we have 5. 5 is squared, or the square of 5 will give us a product of 25. Therefore, 25 now is an example of square numbers. We also have 6 squared, or the square of 6 will give us a product of 36. Another one, we have 7 squared. 7 squared will give us a product of 49. And so on and so forth. So when you are to identify now square numbers, you just simply multiply the number given by itself. So when we say you multiply the number given, let's say for example, 8 is the given number, you multiply 8 by itself once. So 8 times 8, that will give you a product of 64. So we can call now 64 as an example of a square number. So these things, these numbers or these integers are examples of square numbers. Next, for our short activity, let us identify if the following numbers are perfect squares or not. 16. Is 16 a perfect square? Yes, very good. Why? Because we can think of a factor of 16 that when you multiply it by itself once, then it will lead you to a product of 16. And that is 4 times 4. So we have now 4 times 4. It will give us a product of 16. Therefore, 16 is a perfect square number. How about 15? Is 15 a perfect square number? You're right. It's not an example of a perfect square number. Why? Because we cannot think of a factor of 15 that when you multiply it by itself, once, it will give you a product of 15. Therefore, 15 is not a perfect square number. How about 146? Is 146 an example of a perfect square number? It's not an example of a perfect square number. Still, because we cannot think of a factor of 146 that when you multiply it by itself once, it will give us a product of 146. Next, how about 300? Can you think of a factor of 300 that when you multiply it by itself once, it will give you a product of 300? Yes or no? Is it a perfect square number? No, it's not. So we cannot think of a factor of 300 that when you multiply it by itself, it will lead you to a product of 300. How about 324? Is 324 a perfect square number? Yes, it is. Why? Because we can think of a factor of 324 that when you multiply it by itself, okay, it will lead you to a product of 324. That is 18 squared. And 18 squared is equal to 324. Therefore, 324 is an example of a perfect square number. How about 729? Is 729 a perfect square number? Yes or no? Yes, very good. Because factor of 729 that when you multiply it by itself, it will give you a 729 product is equal to 27 squared. So when you multiply 27 by itself, it's equal to 729. So those are examples of perfect square numbers and non-perfect square numbers. Okay, let's get back with square roots. So as you can see, we have a table here. Under the first column, we have the radical form, the roots, the radical form, and the roots. So from our first given example, square root of 1. The square root of 1, it will give us roots positive and negative 1. While the square root of 4, it will give us roots positive 2 and negative 1. So when you are to get now the square root of 1, you are to think of factors of 1 that when you multiply it by itself, it's equal to 1. And what is that? It's 1. Why? Because 1 times 1, it will lead you to a product which is equal to 1. So the roots should be positive and negative 1. How about square root of 4? So you have to think of a number that when you multiply it by itself, it's equal to 4. So we have now 2 squared. Because 2 squared will lead you to a product which is equal to 4. Therefore, the roots of square root of 4 is equal to positive and negative 2. Same procedure will be used when you are to identify now the square root of 9, square root of 16, square root of 25, square root of 36, square root of 49, square root of 64, square root of 81, and square root of 100. What can you notice on the given radical numbers? They are all perfect square numbers. Therefore, we can easily identify their roots. For example, we have square root of 100. So you have to think of a number, okay? Anong number na kapag minultiply mo siya ng isang beses sa kanyang sarili, it's equal to 100. Or when you square it, it's equal to 100. So anong number yon? That is 10. Why? Because when you square 10, it will lead you to a product which is equal to 100. So square root of 100, it's equal to positive negative 10. Okay? Why positive negative 10? Why? Because 10 squared, we all know that's equal to 100. And the quantity negative 10 squared will still give us a product of 100. Okay? Anyway, you will understand more about the concept of square roots as we go through with our discussion. So examples of perfect squares, perfect square numbers represented in an exponential form. So the factors or the exponential form we have for 1. So 1 times 1, that will give you 1 squared. And 1, therefore, we can say that 1 is a perfect square number. Same with 2 times 2 or 2 squared, it will give us 4, and 4 is considered as a perfect square number. The same thing for 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, and 100. So what can you notice? You try to look on the given. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what will you do? You just need to square 1 that is equal to 1. And 1 is considered now as a perfect square number. Square 2, it will give you a product of 4. Square 3, it will give you a product of 9. Square 4, 16. Square 5, 25. Square 6, 36. Square 7, 49. Square 8, 64. Square 9, 81. And square 10 is equal to 100. So we can say that when you square a certain number, whatever is the product, that product now is an example of a perfect square number. Let's now find the square root of the following perfect square numbers. So number 1, we have here square root of 25. So what will you do? You have to think of factors of 25 that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 25. So let's put a blank here so that you can follow, and then you raise it by 2. So anong number ang dapat na ilagay nyo dito sa blank para sa ganon ang magiging sagot is equal to 25. So you just need to express 25 into an exponential form where the exponent is equal to 2. Therefore, anong number ang kailangan dito na ilagay para sa ganon kapag ni-raise ng 2 is equal to 25? So we have 5. Therefore, 5 now is equal to the square root of 25, or square root of 25 is equal to 5, or it's equal to positive negative 5. So the roots of square root of 25 is equal to positive negative 5. For number 2, we have square root of 49. The same thing that you are going to do. You identify a certain base that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 49. So that will give you 7, because 7 squared is equal to 49. So the roots of the given radical number is equal to positive negative 7. For square root of 81, it will give you 9, positive negative 9. Square root of 4 is equal to positive negative 2. Square root of 36 is equal to positive negative 6. Square root of 16 is equal to positive negative 4. Square root of 9 is equal to positive negative 3. Square root of 64 is equal to positive negative 8. Square root of 100 is equal to positive negative 10. And square root of 121 is equal to positive negative 11. So what can you notice? The given are all perfect square numbers. That's why it's very easy for you to identify the square root, okay, or the value of the square root of a perfect square number. You just need to transform the given, or you let it be expressed into an exponential form, and whatever is the base, then that's the final answer. That will be considered as the roots of the given radical number. Just take its positive and negative value. Next. Okay, let's now proceed with principal roots of rational numbers and irrational numbers. We go back with the concept of perfect square. So when we say perfect square, it's the square of a number, okay? And when you get the square of a number, squaring means a number means to raise a number to the second power. So when I say the square of 2, okay, the number there is 2. So you square 2, that means to say you are going to raise the integer 2 to a certain power which is equal to 2. And that's the second power. I repeat. So when I say square 2, meaning, so square 2, so we have square 2, yan. So the base should be equal to 2. You square it, so meaning it's on the second power. So you have to write 2 here as the exponent. Okay, so this is the concept now of squaring a number. So when you square a number, you have to raise the certain number given to the second power. Okay, so that's the concept of squaring. Next, example. So we have here examples. So let's say square 4. So we have now the expression. It will lead us to the expression 4 squared. And 4 squared is equal to 4 times 4. And 4 times 4 is equal to 16. So 16 is an example of a perfect square number. Next, 9 squared, or the square of 9. The square of 9 is equal to 9 times 9. And 9 times 9 will lead us to the product, which is equal to 81. Same thing with 16 squared. 16 squared, or the square of 16, is equal to 16 times 16, which will lead us to the product that is equal to 256. So that's how easy you are going to evaluate now the squares of numbers. Let's proceed with square roots. Finding the square root of a number is the inverse operation of squaring that number. Always remember that the square of a number is that number times itself. And the perfect squares are the squares of the whole numbers. So these things should be understood well in order for you to perform problems under square roots. So always remember that when you find the square root of a number, it is the inverse operation of squaring that number. So let us identify. I have presented a while ago radical numbers. Let's get back with it. Let's identify the different parts of square roots. So the square root of a number, let us represent it using the variable n, written below, is the number that gives n when multiplied by itself. There are certain parts of a radical number or square roots. So we have there, what do you call that symbol? The symbol there is what we call now the radical sign. Okay? Ito po, we call this one as the radical sign. That's the symbol for radical numbers or square roots. Okay? Next. How about this one? Okay? Yeah. space dyan, or there is an imaginary number there. That is what we call the index. Okay? Sir, wala naman po kaming nakikita. There is an imaginary number here which is equal to 2, but no need for you to write 2 because it is considered already that when you use the radical sign here, square root, you are dealing with the index which is equal to 2. Okay? Next, how about the n variable? The n variable here, or yung number or yung expression na nasa loob ng radical sign, we call that one as the radicand. I repeat, the symbol that is being used for radical numbers is what we call now the radical sign, while yung number na nakikita nyo before, okay, the symbol radical sign, okay, which is written on the uppermost part of the radical symbol or the radical sign, it's what we call now the index. And the n variable here, or the expression that is found inside the radical sign, we call it as radicand. Okay. Under square roots, you have to remember that every positive number has 2 square roots. So when you are to evaluate now problems under square roots, when the given number is a positive number, expected that you have 2 positive square roots, okay? Or 2 square roots rather. So every positive number has 2 square roots. So we have what we call the principal root and the secondary root. When we say principal root, it's always the positive square root of the given number. While for secondary root, it's the negative square root of the given number. A negative number has no square root in the set of real numbers. Okay? Kasi ibang number na yung given. It will be an imaginary number when the given square root is a negative number. Okay? Or when you are to identify now the square root of a negative number. When you are to identify the square root of a negative number, then it has no square root in the set of real numbers because it is considered as an imaginary number. 0 has only 1 square root. Okay? Take note of the following things, and the square root of 0 is equal to 0. No positive, negative, okay? Just simply equal to 0. The square root of any positive integer that is not a perfect square is an irrational number. Okay, take note, if the radicand is not a perfect square number, therefore, the solution set or the square root of that particular positive integer is an irrational number. Examples. So we have the square root of 4. The square root of 4, we all know, we have to identify what's the first thing that we need to do. We have to identify the radicand of the given radical number. So what is the radicand of square root of 4? It's equal to 4. And we all know that 4 is a perfect square number. So it would be easy for us to identify its square root. And its square root is equal to 2. Same with square root of 9, which is equal to 3. Square root of 16, which is equal to 4. Square root of 2, which is equal to 2. Is square root of 2. And square root of 0 is equal to 0. Let's get back with example number 4. Square root of 2. What is the square root of 2? We all know that 2 is not a perfect square number. And we cannot think of a certain factor of 2 that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 2, right? Therefore, the answer should be equal to square root of 2. Still, it's equal to square root of 2. Okay? Because it's already in its simplest radical form. Okay? So square root of 2 is still equal to square root of 2. Now, let's find the square root of the following numbers. The square root of 64. What's the first thing that you need to do? You have to identify whether the radicand is a perfect square number so that it would be easy for you to evaluate the problem. So square root of 64, is 64 a perfect square number? Yes. Why? Because we can think of a factor of 64 that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 64. And what is that? It's equal to 8. Okay? Square root of 144. Square root of 144 is equal to, sorry, this should be positive negative 8. This should also be equal to positive negative 1. The square root of 121, it would be equal to positive negative 11. Square root of 169, it would be equal to positive negative 13. And square root of 81 would be equal to positive negative 9. So that's how you evaluate now square root of the given numbers. Okay, it would be easy for you to evaluate it. Why? Because we can see, or we can somehow identify already that the radicand is a perfect square number. Next, square roots of positive numbers which are not perfect square numbers. So how about if the radicand, sir, is not a perfect square number? Because what we have simplified a while ago with the following examples we have solved are examples under perfect square numbers, or the radicands are perfect square numbers, or yung numbers na nandun sa loob ng radical sign are all perfect square numbers. Kaya masyadong mabilis na evaluate. But what about if the numbers that are inside the radical sign, okay, or nasa loob ng radical sign are not perfect squares? Okay, how will you deal with that problem? Number 1, square root of 8. So what will you do? You have to think of a factor of the given radical, which is a perfect square, then simplify applying the concept of principal square roots. So square root of 8, we all know that 8 is not a perfect square number because we cannot think of a number that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 8. So what will you do? You have to factor out 8. Okay? Ang kailangan yung factor ng 8 ay isang perfect square number, okay? Or let's say PSN. PSN, I am referring to perfect square number. And isang hindi. Isang non-PSN. Okay? Or non-perfect square number. Take note, when you are to consider the perfect square number, it must be the highest perfect square number of the given radicand. Okay? Highest perfect square number. So what is the highest perfect square number factor of 8? That is 4. Okay? And we have, what will you multiply to 4 so that it will give you a product of 8? It will be equal to 2. Okay? Hindi naman pwedeng 4 times 4 because 4 times 4, it will give us 16. And it will not be equal to the given radicand, which is equal to 8. So always remember that when you are to solve the square root of non-perfect square numbers, you have to think of a factor of the given radicand, or the number that is inside the radical sign, which is a perfect square, and then you have to simplify it, applying now the concept of principal square roots. So in here, we have 4 and 2. You have to evaluate now square root of 4. So pag hiwalayin nyo silang dalawa, yung dalawang numbers or dalawang factors na nakuha nyo based from your radicand, which is 8, so square root of 4 times square root of 2. In-expand lang natin sila. Square root of 4 times square root of 2 is still the same with square root of 4 times 2. Okay? And square root of 4 times square root of 2, you are now ready to evaluate. Square root of 4, 4 is a perfect square number. You have to think of factor of 4 that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 4. So it would be easy because 4 is a perfect square number. So square root of 4 is equal to 2. And then you just need to bring down now the non-perfect square numbers. Okay? Square root of 2, then square root of 2. So the final answer would be 2 square root of 2. So square root of 8 is equal to 2 square root of 2. Next, number 2, square root of 50. The same thing that you are going to apply here. So you have to think of factor of 50, which is a perfect square number. And then you just need to follow the steps on how to solve the principal roots or principal square roots of a given number. So square root of 50, ano yung factor ng 50? Na perfect square number siya, highest perfect square number ng 50. Pwedeng 25. So 25 is the highest perfect square number factor of 50. What will you multiply to 25 so that it will give you 50 that is equal to 2? So these are the factors of 50. So 25 and 2. And then you evaluate now. So square root of 25 is equal to 5, and then square root of 2 is equal to 2. Square root of 2 rather. So the final answer would be 5 square root of 2. Okay, next, square root of 56. So square root of 56, factors of 56, highest perfect square number factor, we have 4. So square root of 4 times square root of 14. Square root of 4 is 2 times square root of 14. You just need to bring down the non-perfect square number factor of the given radicand, which is square root of 14. So our final answer would be 2 square root of 14. Okay, number 4, square root of 96. Okay, ganon din, the same procedure or the same steps. You think of a factor of the radicand that is a perfect square number and then evaluate. Okay, square root of 96, factors of 96, highest perfect square number factor is 16. What will you multiply to 16 so that it will give you 96? It's equal to 6. So 16 times 6, it's equal to 96. Therefore, we can now evaluate square root of 16 is equal to 4, and then you just need to bring down now the square root of 6. You cannot perform or evaluate already square root of 6 because it's now in its simplest form. Okay? Because wala na kayong maisip na factors ng 6 na pwede nyong kunin ang square root niya. So the final answer would be 4 square root of 6. Okay, number 1. How about square root of 121? You check always, okay, whether the given radicand is a perfect square number. So square root of 121, we all know that this is equal to 11. Okay. Square root of 225 is equal to, what is this? Square root of 225? You're right, it's equal to 15. Next, square root of 256. Square root of 256 is equal to 16. If I were you, you go back with your multiplication table. Okay, yung 1 times 1 is equal to 1. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. 3 times 3 is equal to 9. You go back with your basic, okay, on how you are to solve, you go back with your multiplication table so that it would be easier for you to identify perfect square numbers. Because the square of a number, or when you square a certain number, the product is already an example of a perfect square number. Square root of 50. So square root of 50, we identify 50, it is an example of a perfect square number. So may isip ba kayong factor ng factor ng 50 na kapag ni-raise nyo by 2 is equal to 50? Wala. Therefore, we have to evaluate this one using the concept evaluating non-perfect square numbers. Okay? So we have, or evaluating the square roots of non-perfect square numbers. So think of factors of 50. Ano yung highest perfect square number factor ng 50? That is 25. Okay? What will you multiply to 25 so that it will give you a product of 50? 2. And then you evaluate. Square root of 25, paghiwalayin niyo sila. And then don't forget the operation, which is multiplication times square root of 2. Square root of 25 is equal to 5. Bring down square root of 2. So 5 square root of 2 is the final answer. Square root of 44. Square root of 44 is square root of 44 is 44 a perfect square number? No, it's not. So we have to get the factors of 44, okay? Identify one factor that is a perfect square number. So the highest perfect square number factor of 44 is 4. Okay, times what will you multiply to 4 so that will give you 44 as a product? It's equal to 11. Sorry, this should be 11. Okay, 11. So evaluate now square root of 4 times square root of 11. Square root of 4 is equal to 2. Bring down square root of 11. So this is how you are going to solve now the given problem, which is square root of 44. How about square root of 45? So square root of 45 is equal to, identify whether 45 is a perfect square number. 45 is not a perfect square number. Therefore, think of factors of 45, which is a perfect square number. Okay, so what is the highest perfect square number factor of 45? It's 9. What will you multiply it to 9 so that it will give you 45? 5. So 9 times 5 is 45. So we have now square root of 9 times square root of 5. It will give us now 3 square root of 5. So our final answer should be equal to 3 square root of 5. Next, number 7. Square root of 28. Still, 28 is not a perfect square number. So mag-iisip tayo ng factors ng 28 na may perfect square number, siya, highest perfect square number factor. So we have 4 times 7. And square root of 4 times square root of 7 is equal to square root of 28. And then evaluate square root of 4 is equal to 2 times square root of 7. So the final answer is 2 square root of 7. For number 8, we have now square root of 120. Still, it's not a perfect square number. So ito yung solution ng number 7. For number 8, we have square root of 120. So we have now, what's the highest possible perfect square number factor of 120? 4 and 30. Okay, so we have now square root of 4 times square root of 30. Square root of 4 is equal to 2. Then you just need to bring down square root of 30. So the final answer should be 2 square root of 30. Next, for number 9, we have square root of 289. Check whether the radicand is a perfect square number. Okay, so 289, is it a perfect square number? Yes, it is. Because we can think of a factor of 289 that when you raise it by 2, it's equal to 289. And what is that? It's equal to 17 squared. So 17 squared will lead you to a product of 289. Therefore, the square root of 289 is equal to 70. This time, we try to use operations, okay? Or yes, use operations in solving now the square roots of certain numbers. So we have square root of 16 plus square root of 4. How will you do this? So square root of 16, it's a perfect square number. 16 is a perfect square number, so it would be easy for you to identify its square root. Square root of 16 is equal to 4. Plus square root of 4 is equal to 2. Therefore, the sum now is equal to 6. Next, how about square root of 81 plus square root of 49? As you can see, the radicands are examples of perfect square numbers. So mabilis lang identify yung square root nila. Square root of 81 is equal to 9 plus square root of 49 is equal to 7. Therefore, the sum is equal to 16. How about if we are dealing with division? So square root of 225, 225 is still an example of a perfect square number, and square root of 225 is equal to 15. 15 divided by square root of 9. 9 is a perfect square number. Therefore, square root of 9 is equal to 3. 15 divided by 3 is equal to 5. Next, how about square root of 128? So we simplify square root of 128. 128 is not a perfect square number, so we have to think of factors of 128. We consider the highest possible perfect square number factor of the given radicand. And what is that? That is square root of 64 times 2. So it will lead us to square root of 64 times square root of 2. We now have 8 square root of 2. So the answer should be equal to 8 square root of 2. How about square root of 108? 108 is not an example of a perfect square number. So mag-iisip ulit kayo ng factors ng 108. Na perfect square number siya. And always consider the highest perfect square number. So square root of 108, we have 36. What will you multiply to 36 so that it will give you 108? 3. So we have now square root of 36 times square root of 3. We now have 6 square root of 3. So our final answer will be equal to 6 square root of 3. Next, square root of 36 times square root of 100. The square root of 36 is a perfect square number. So mabilis lang i-identify yung square root niya. And its square root is equal to 6. Multiply it to the square root of 100, which is equal to 10. Then the product would be equal to 60. How about square root of 121? Square root of 121 is equal to 11 minus the square root of 49 is equal to 7. The difference now is equal to 4. 11 minus 7 is equal to 4. Next, square root of 64 is equal to 8. And divided by the square root of 4, which is equal to 2, will lead us to the quotient, which is equal to 4. 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4. Another one. So we have the square root of 24. So the radicand is an example of a non-perfect square number. So mag-iisip na naman kayo ng factors ng radicand na highest perfect square number factor. So we have 4 times 6. And then you expand it, square root of 4 times square root of 6, paghiwalayin yung perfect square number at saka yung non-perfect square number. Square root of 4 is equal to 2. You just need to bring down square root of 6. The final answer would be 2 square root of 6. How about square root of 300? So square root of 300 is now equal to saan ko ilalagay? Wait, okay, dito na lang. So we have square root of 300. We have to consider factors of 300. Anong perfect square number? Highest perfect square number factor ng 300, that is 100 times 3. So we have now square root of 100 times square root of 3. It will now give us an answer which is equal to 10 square root of 3. Therefore, square root of 300 is equal to 10 square root of 3. And that would be all for our square roots or square numbers and square roots. Okay, I hope you understood or you have understood something from the given presentation. So always remember that when you evaluate radical numbers or the square root of a certain number, check first whether the given radicand is a perfect square number or if it is not a perfect square number. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you all.